We begin in Argentina, where they're coming to terms with the end of a trial that traumatized the nation. Two former junta leaders have been sentenced for their part in the theft of babies during the country's dirty war of the 1970s and 1980s. CCTV's Daniel Schweimler joins us live from Buenos Aires with more on the story. Daniel.
Well, the trial is now over, and this has really been a day of reflection. And I think the surviving victims and the families of those victims are very pleased with the result. But they're now having to decide where they go from here and where this result leaves Argentina.
They showed no emotion, these men responsible for the kidnapping of babies and the murder of their mothers. They did it in the name of a military government that became notorious for torturing and killing 30,000 of its own people. Justice has been a long time coming, but for these people it has been worth the wait.
This is justice. It came. Let's remember, we started this in 1996. At that time, we didn't know if we were going to make it to this moment or not. We couldn't foresee this.
This is the Naval Mechanics School in Buenos Aires, or ESMA by its Spanish initials, the most infamous of the many detention centres used by the Argentine military. It was in this sparse room that women gave birth, before their babies were snatched from them and given up for adoption to military families. Human rights groups believe as many as 400. The mothers were usually killed. Carlos Muñoz was a prisoner here for a year and a half.
This was where our comrades gave birth, in the worst conditions. They were always thrown on mattresses. They were also handcuffed. They were also beaten and tortured. There was no pity.
The period under military rule became known as the Dirty War. Jorge Videla and his fellow dictators' actions condemned both at home and abroad. But subsequent Argentine civilian governments decided not to prosecute them, in the interests of putting the past behind them. The families of the victims, however, continued to march, the mothers demanding answers, the grandmothers to search for their stolen grandchildren. And in 2005, the trials resumed.
To me, the grandmother's fight, the mother's fight, the recovery of so many grandchildren, more than 1,000, put these sentences into context. It shows clearly that there is no going back and that we can't deny what happened.
The ESMA building is a museum now, a place of remembrance and education. Its nightmares still floating around these well-tended grounds. The trials, meanwhile, go on as Argentines continue to search for answers.
I mean, the ESMA is an incredibly harrowing place, and this is a very traumatic story, which is by no means over. Elaine.
Well, Daniel, it's been nearly 30 years since military rule ended in Argentina. Why has this taken so long?
Well, I think the initial reason was that the first two civilian governments which followed the military decided to try to put their past behind them and either gave amnesties to some of those accused people or basically just didn't want the trials to happen. So we went more than 20 years without anybody being tried for these horrendous crimes. And it was only with the government of Néstor Kirchner and then his wife Cristina Kirchner from 2003 onwards that they decided to resume the trials, and they only started again in 2005, and it's been a long, slow process until we've arrived at this point now.
Does Argentina, young Argentines, care about what happened all those years ago? Is this still relevant today?
Yes, I think it is. From the amount of publicity, the amount of interest shown in this particular case, even though some of these ex-leaders are now in their 80s, in their 90s, many of them have already died, there's a great deal of interest, a great deal of media coverage. And that place we saw, the ESMA, the former detention centre, is open now to the public. When we visited it earlier today, there were many school parties there. Some of those survivors, that man Carlos Muñoz you saw in the film, goes out to schools, goes out to colleges, talks to people in an attempt to keep the memory of those that they lost and in an attempt to keep this story very much alive in the young population. And they do pay a lot of attention, a great deal of interest.
Okay, Daniel Schweimler reporting live from Buenos Aires.